I never thought I'd spend my last night on Earth staring at a being whose eyes held the birth and death of galaxies. He stood in my living room, ancient beyond comprehension, yet speaking with a gentleness that made my chest ache. "Your scientists measure stars in luminosity," he said, his voice resonating through my bones. "But they've never measured what I've seen across 10,000 civilizations. They've never measured the light of a human soul." He moved closer, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a warmth spreading through my chest, like something dormant was finally waking up. "What you call consciousness," he continued, "we call the eternal radiance. And humanity possesses it in a concentration that defies every law we've documented. Your souls don't just glow. They burn with an intensity that makes stars look dim." I thought he was speaking metaphorically, but what he revealed next shattered everything I believed about human existence, about why we're really here, and about the cosmic secret that has been hidden from us since the beginning. If you want to understand what makes humanity truly extraordinary in a universe teeming with life, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Because what you're about to discover will change how you see yourself forever. Dr. Sarah Chen, 42 years old, astrophysicist, professor at a prestigious university, sat alone in her home office at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night. 3 empty coffee cups on her desk. 17 browser tabs open, all showing the same incomprehensible data. 6 months of observations that defied every known principle of physics. Sarah had dedicated her life to understanding the universe. Bachelor's degree from MIT. PhD from Cambridge. 2 decades studying stellar formation, cosmic radiation, the birth and death of stars. A career built on rationality, empirical evidence, mathematical certainty. But the data from the past 6 months broke everything. It started with anomalous readings from the James Webb Space Telescope. Light signatures that shouldn't exist. Wavelengths that had no known source. Energy patterns that violated thermodynamic laws. And Sarah, tasked with explaining these anomalies, had found no explanation. Tonight marked her deadline. Tomorrow morning, presentation to the International Astronomical Union. Expected to provide answers. But she had none. Sarah leaned back in her chair, rubbed her tired eyes, and whispered to the empty room, "What am I missing? There has to be a pattern. There's always a pattern." The temperature dropped. Not gradually, but instantly. Her breath became visible. The hum of her computer seemed to slow, deepen, as if time itself was bending. Sarah's rational mind immediately catalogued possibilities. HVAC malfunction, sudden weather change, equipment failure. But her instincts, the primal part of her brain that evolution had honed for millions of years, screamed a different message. You are not alone. The air in front of her desk began to shimmer. Not like heat waves. More like reality itself was becoming translucent, revealing something behind it. And Sarah, frozen in her chair, watched as a figure materialized. Not appearing from nothing, but as if it had always been there and was only now allowing itself to be seen. The being stood approximately 7 feet tall. Humanoid in basic structure, but with proportions that were subtly wrong. Longer limbs. A torso that seemed to contain more than 3 dimensions. Skin that wasn't quite skin, more like condensed starlight, shifting between silver and gold and colors Sarah had no names for. But it was the eyes that held her. Immense. Deep. Not dark, but containing darkness. The darkness between stars, the void that held galaxies. And within that darkness, light. Points of brilliance that moved, swirled, like watching the birth of solar systems in real time. Sarah's scientific training kicked in despite her shock. Observe. Document. Analyze. Her mouth opened to speak, but no sound came. The being's voice filled the room. Not audible through her ears, but resonating directly in her mind. A telepathic transmission that carried not just words, but emotions, contexts, entire concepts compressed into instantaneous understanding. Dr. Sarah Chen. Astrophysicist. Seeker of cosmic truth. Your confusion regarding the anomalous data is warranted. What you've been observing for 6 months is not stellar radiation. It is humanity radiating. And you are witnessing something that occurs nowhere else in the documented universe. Sarah found her voice, though it came out as a whisper. Who, what are you? The being's form seemed to pulse gently, as if breathing, though Sarah doubted it needed to breathe. I am Zephyros, elder observer of the Luminescence Council. My species has traveled this galaxy for 847,000 of your years, documenting consciousness in all its forms. We have encountered 9,847 sentient species. We have studied civilizations that span star systems. We have witnessed beings of pure energy, hive minds encompassing billions, organic machine hybrids that transcend your concepts of life. And in all this vastness, Dr. Chen, we have never encountered anything like humanity. Sarah's rational mind struggled to process. Alien contact. Real. Confirmed. But instead of fear, she felt a strange sense of validation. As if part of her had always known humanity was being observed. The data I've been analyzing, Sarah said, her scientist brain already making connections. The unexplained energy signatures. That's us? Humanity. Zephyros moved closer, and Sarah noticed that he didn't walk so much as glide, as if gravity was a suggestion rather than a law. Precisely. What your instruments have detected is the collective radiance of human consciousness. Every thought, every emotion, every moment of genuine connection between souls. These generate energy that radiates outward at frequencies your technology is only now sophisticated enough to barely detect. Sarah pulled up the data on her screen. The wavelength patterns. The energy spikes. 6 months of incomprehensible readings suddenly reframed. But this would mean the energy output I'm seeing would require. She did rapid calculations in her head. This is more energy than produced by a medium-sized star. That's impossible for biological consciousness. By every law we've observed across 10,000 civilizations, Zephyros confirmed, yes. It should be impossible. That is why we've been watching humanity with particular intensity for the past 200 of your years. Your species emits consciousness energy at a level 347 times higher than the galactic average. And rising. Sarah felt her worldview cracking. Everything she'd built her career on. The belief that humanity was insignificant. A tiny accident on a small planet orbiting an average star in an ordinary galaxy. The Copernican principle. Mediocrity principle. The scientific consensus that Earth held nothing special. But why? Sarah asked. What makes human consciousness so energetic? Zephyros gestured, and the air between them formed into a three-dimensional display. Images appeared, not projected but somehow woven into reality itself. Sarah saw Earth from space, but overlaid with something new, light. Brilliant, pulsing light emanating from every continent, every city, concentrated where humans gathered. To answer that, Zephyros said, I must first help you understand what consciousness truly is. Your scientists treat it as an emergent property of brain chemistry. Neurons firing. Synapses connecting. A biological phenomenon. But consciousness, Dr. Chen, is fundamental. It is not produced by matter. Matter is produced by consciousness. Sarah wanted to argue. Years of training in materialist science demanded she push back. But the data on her screen, the being standing in her office, the 6 months of impossible readings, all of it pointed to something her education had never prepared her for. Every conscious being, Zephyros continued, generates what we call the luminescence field. It is the energy signature of awareness itself. In most species, this field is modest. Sufficient for individual survival, basic communication, simple problem-solving. But humanity. The display showed a comparison. Other species, represented as small, steady glows. Then humanity, a blazing, fluctuating inferno of light. Your luminescence field is extraordinary. Not because your brains are larger, though they are impressively complex. Not because you live longer, for you do not. The difference is in how you feel. Feel. Sarah repeated. Emotional capacity, Zephyros clarified. Emotional range. Emotional depth. Emotional complexity. Most sentient species experience a narrow band of emotions. Fear. Satisfaction. Basic social bonding. But humans. The display zoomed into a single human figure, and Sarah watched as colors exploded around it. Thousands of distinct shades, constantly shifting, blending, intensifying. You experience emotions with an intensity and variety that generates extraordinary energy. Joy that could power cities. Grief that ripples across continents. Love that. Zephyros paused, and Sarah detected something in his telepathic voice she didn't expect: reverence. Love that burns brighter than any star we've ever measured. Sarah's hands trembled slightly. She thought of her daughter, Emma, asleep upstairs. The feeling she got when she looked at Emma's face. The fierce, protective, unconditional surge of emotion that felt infinite. You're saying, Sarah processed carefully, that human emotions generate actual, measurable energy. Not just measurable, Zephyros corrected. Immense. A single human experiencing profound love generates more consciousness energy in 1 minute than some entire species generate in their lifetimes. And when emotions are shared, when humans connect deeply with one another, the energy amplifies exponentially. Two souls recognizing each other. True intimacy. Genuine compassion. These create luminescence bursts that we can detect from neighboring star systems. Sarah thought of the data spikes in her observations. The largest readings had occurred during, she checked the dates, December, July, times of global celebration, Christmas, New Year's, major sporting events when billions watched together. The anomalous spikes I detected, Sarah said, making connections rapidly now. They correlate with global events. Times when humanity feels collectively. Precisely, Zephyros confirmed. When 2 billion humans experienced collective joy during the 2026 World Cup final, the luminescence burst was visible to observers 40 light-years away. When humanity mourned collectively after major disasters, the grief signature reached across the galaxy. Your species' emotional resonance transcends the boundaries of your planet. Sarah felt overwhelmed. But why haven't we known this? Why didn't our instruments detect this before? Your technology only recently became sensitive enough, Zephyros explained. And even now, most scientists dismiss the readings as equipment errors because they contradict established theory. You, Dr. Chen, are among the first to persist in seeking explanation rather than dismissing data that doesn't fit existing paradigms. That is why I chose to make contact with you specifically. Sarah absorbed that. Chosen. Not random. What do you want me to do with this information? Zephyros' form seemed to intensify, becoming more solid, more present. I want you to understand what humanity truly is. Because your species stands at a threshold. And what happens in the next generation will determine not just humanity's fate, but the fate of consciousness evolution throughout the galaxy. Zephyros gestured again, and Sarah's office transformed. The walls didn't disappear. They remained, but became translucent, revealing something beyond. Space. Not empty space, but space as Zephyros saw it. Sarah gasped. The universe was alive with light. Every star still visible, but now accompanied by something else. Glows. Auras. Fields of luminescence surrounding some stars, absent from others. And Sarah understood immediately, these were consciousness fields. The energy signatures of civilizations. This, Zephyros transmitted, is how observers perceive the galaxy. Every point of light you see represents not just a star, but a world with sentient life. We have been mapping the luminescence fields of civilizations for nearly 1 million years. Sarah's mind reeled at the implications. How many? How many sentient species exist? In this galaxy alone, Zephyros said, we have documented 9,847 species that meet the threshold criteria for sentience. Self-awareness, abstract reasoning, cultural transmission of knowledge. Millions more if we include more basic forms of consciousness. The universe, Dr. Chen, is not silent. It is singing. But most humans cannot yet hear the song. The view zoomed toward one particular star system, 3 planets, each glowing with distinct colors. These are the Keltharians, a species 2.3 million years more evolved than humanity. Their civilization spans 4 planets. They have mastered faster-than-light travel. They live in harmony with their environment. No war in 40,000 years. They are, by all measures, advanced. Sarah watched the peaceful, steady glow of the Keltharian worlds. Then Zephyros shifted the view to Earth. The difference was staggering. Where the Keltharian worlds glowed with calm, steady light, Earth burned with chaotic intensity. Flares of brilliant radiance erupting constantly. Waves of color surging across continents. Pulses of energy that dwarfed anything Sarah had seen from the other species. The Keltharians, Zephyros continued, have achieved technological and social mastery. But their luminescence field, while stable, is modest. They experience contentment, satisfaction, mild curiosity. Their emotional range is limited by their evolutionary path, a path that favored stability over intensity. They live peacefully because they cannot feel conflict deeply. They cooperate because they cannot feel individuality intensely. They are advanced, but... Zephyros paused. They are dim. Earth blazed on the display. Humanity, Zephyros said with that same tone of reverence, is the opposite. Technologically primitive. Socially chaotic. Environmentally reckless. By conventional measures of advancement, you rank in the lower third of galactic civilizations. But your luminescence field. The view zoomed closer to Earth, and Sarah watched lights exploding across every city, every town, every place humans gathered. You burn with an intensity that makes ancient civilizations look like dying embers. Sarah didn't know whether to feel proud or terrified. Is that good? Good is not a category we apply, Zephyros replied. It is extraordinary. It is unprecedented. It is exactly what the galaxy has been waiting for without knowing it was waiting. The display shifted to show a timeline. Billions of years compressing into minutes. Sarah watched as consciousness emerged across the galaxy. First simple, then complex, then technologically advanced. But every civilization followed similar trajectories. Steady, predictable, stable. Then the timeline reached Earth. The line representing human consciousness didn't follow the pattern. Instead of smooth, steady growth, it spiked, sharp, jagged, explosive increases punctuated by crashes and valleys. Every other species we've observed, Zephyros explained, develops consciousness along predictable curves. Linear progression. Smooth advancement. But humanity. The human line looked like a seismograph during an earthquake. You do not evolve steadily. You explode. You create. You destroy. You feel with such intensity that your consciousness field fluctuates wildly. You are the only species we've ever encountered that can experience genuine ecstasy and genuine despair within the same individual lifetime. Sarah thought about human history. The heights of art, music, literature. The depths of war, genocide, cruelty. All of it products of that intense emotional range. Most species, Zephyros continued, cannot create like humans create. They cannot produce a Beethoven symphony because they cannot feel the emotional depths from which such creation emerges. They cannot write a Shakespeare tragedy because they cannot comprehend that level of existential anguish. They cannot paint a Van Gogh because they cannot experience reality with that intensity of perception. The display showed examples. Art from other civilizations, technically proficient, aesthetically pleasant, but somehow flat. Lacking the raw emotional power of human creation. Your artists, your musicians, your writers, Zephyros transmitted, they are consciousness alchemists. They transform emotional energy into expressions that resonate across souls. When a human hears music that moves them to tears, they are experiencing a luminescence exchange. Soul speaking directly to soul, bypassing language, culture, even time. A human can weep at a piece of music composed 300 years ago because the emotional frequency transcends temporal boundaries. Sarah thought of the last time she'd cried listening to music. A piano piece her mother used to play. The memory, the emotion, the connection across time. All of it suddenly reframed as something more than just personal sentiment. But this intensity, Zephyros continued, comes with a cost. The same emotional depth that allows you to create sublime beauty also allows you to inflict tremendous suffering. The same capacity for love that generates extraordinary luminescence also enables hatred, jealousy, cruelty. You are a species of extremes. And that has made you both the most dangerous and most promising species we've ever encountered. Dangerous how? Sarah asked. The display shifted to show human history. Not from textbooks, but from Zephyros' perspective. Wars appearing as dark explosions of negative energy. The Holocaust, Rwanda, Cambodia, massive wounds in the luminescence field. But also moments of extraordinary light. Acts of heroism, compassion, self-sacrifice that blazed like supernovas. Most species, Zephyros explained, lack the capacity for true evil because they lack the capacity for true good. They exist in a narrow band of gray. But humans. The display showed both extremes. You can be saints or monsters. And sometimes the same individual contains both potentials. This makes you unstable, unpredictable. By galactic standards, you are considered a high-risk species. Risk of what? Sarah pressed. Self-destruction, Zephyros said simply. Most species reach technological maturity before emotional maturity. They develop weapons before wisdom. But their moderate emotional range limits how destructive they can be. Humans, however. The display showed nuclear arsenals, climate change trajectories, emerging AI technologies. You are developing godlike powers while still operating with primitive emotional patterns. Fear, tribalism, short-term thinking. The combination is extraordinarily dangerous. We have calculated that humanity has a 67% probability of self-extinction within the next 200 years if current trajectories continue. Sarah felt a chill. That's why you're here? To warn us? No, Zephyros replied. We do not intervene in species development. That is forbidden by our highest laws. We observe. We document. We witness. But we do not interfere. Every species must navigate their own evolution or fail. Then why tell me this? Zephyros' form seemed to soften, becoming more translucent. Because observation is not the same as isolation. And occasionally, when a species reaches a critical threshold, an elder observer is permitted to make contact with a single individual. Not to change the species' trajectory, but to offer perspective. To ensure that at least one human understands what is truly at stake. Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility. Why me? Because your search for truth is genuine, Zephyros said. Because you have the mind to understand what I'm revealing and the platform to potentially communicate it. And because. He paused, and Sarah sensed something personal entering the transmission. Because I have been observing your world for 40 of your years. I have watched your species closely. And I have developed something that we observers rarely experience, hope. Sarah's throat tightened. An ancient being who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations across hundreds of millennia, feeling hope for humanity. The emotion behind it was almost overwhelming. The reason your souls glow brighter than stars, Zephyros transmitted, is not random. It is not accidental. It is the result of a unique evolutionary path that prioritized emotional capacity over stability. Most species evolve to minimize conflict, to create harmony, to optimize survival through cooperation. But Earth. The display showed Earth's violent geological history. Ice ages, asteroid impacts, mass extinctions. Your planet has been catastrophically unstable. Species that survived here had to develop extraordinary adaptability, extraordinary resilience, and eventually, in your case, extraordinary emotional complexity. The display showed early humans. Not the idealized versions from textbooks, but the harsh reality. Small groups struggling to survive. Watching children die. Losing loved ones to predators, disease, starvation. And Sarah understood. Humans developed intense emotional bonding as a survival mechanism. Love evolved in humans, Zephyros explained, not as a pleasant luxury, but as a survival necessity. Groups that bonded emotionally survived better than groups that didn't. Parents who felt intense attachment to offspring produced more successful children. Communities that developed empathy and cooperation outlasted those that didn't. And over hundreds of thousands of years, this evolutionary pressure created an emotional capacity unlike anything else in the documented galaxy. Sarah watched human evolution unfold. The development of language, art, music, ritual, all of it rooted in that extraordinary emotional capacity. But here is what makes humanity truly unique. Zephyros transmitted, and the display zoomed to show something new. Other species develop consciousness through their evolutionary path and then plateau. They reach an optimal level and stabilize. But humans. The human consciousness line on the display didn't plateau. It kept climbing. You are still evolving. Your luminescence field is still intensifying. And at your current rate of emotional and consciousness development, humanity will reach a threshold that no other species has ever achieved. What threshold? Sarah asked. Transcendence, Zephyros said, and the word resonated through Sarah's entire being. The point where consciousness becomes powerful enough to directly manipulate reality. Where the luminescence field becomes so intense that thought and matter blur. We have theoretical models for this. We call it the radiance ascension. But we have never observed it actually occurring. Until recently, we believed it was impossible. The display showed projections. Human consciousness continuing to intensify over the next several generations, reaching a critical threshold around the year 2150. Beyond that point, the models became uncertain, showing multiple possible outcomes. If humanity reaches radiance ascension, Zephyros explained, you will become the first species in galactic history to evolve into pure consciousness while retaining individual identity. You will transcend biological limitations while maintaining the emotional intensity that defines you. You will, in essence, become living stars, conscious beings of pure luminescent energy. Sarah's mind struggled with the concept. That sounds impossible. By current physics, yes, Zephyros agreed. But consciousness itself was once thought impossible by materialist frameworks. The fact that you exist at all, that awareness can emerge from matter, already violates the principles that most civilizations initially held. Radiance ascension is simply the next impossible thing that becomes possible. Sarah thought of her daughter again. Emma's future. Her grandchildren's future. Humanity's future. But you said we have a 67% chance of self-destruction. How do we get to ascension instead? And here, Zephyros' transmission became heavier, more urgent. That, Dr. Sarah Chen, is the question that determines everything. The display in Sarah's office shifted again, now showing two diverging paths. Two possible futures for humanity, branching from the present moment. The first path glowed with increasing brightness, culminating in an explosion of light so intense that Sarah had to look away, the radiance ascension. Humanity transformed into conscious light, retaining individuality but transcending physical limitation. The second path grew progressively dimmer. The luminescence field flickering, fading, until finally extinguishing entirely. Not explosion. Extinction through exhaustion. The challenge, Zephyros transmitted, is that the same intensity that makes ascension possible also makes destruction likely. Your emotional extremes are both your greatest strength and greatest vulnerability. And currently, humanity is using its extraordinary consciousness capacity primarily for suffering. The display zoomed into contemporary Earth, and Sarah watched as the luminescence field showed not just light, but color, and those colors revealed emotional states. She saw cities pulsing with anxiety, sharp yellow flashes. Regions throbbing with anger, deep red waves. Areas flickering with depression. Dull gray patches spreading like infections. Observe, Zephyros directed. What you're seeing is the real-time emotional state of humanity. And the pattern is concerning. Your species currently generates extraordinary amounts of consciousness energy, but approximately 73% of that energy is routed through negative emotional states. Fear, anger, shame, loneliness. Despair. Sarah watched the display with growing horror. The most technologically advanced regions showed the darkest colors. Cities that should have been bright with connection instead pulsed with isolated individuals, each generating intense luminescence but trapped in negative frequencies. Your technology, Zephyros explained, has created a paradox. You are more connected than ever through your devices, yet more isolated than ever emotionally. You can speak to anyone on the planet instantly, yet genuine intimacy is declining. You have access to unlimited information, yet wisdom is scarce. You have developed tools that should amplify consciousness, but instead, they often suppress it. The display showed patterns. Humans staring at screens, their luminescence fields flickering erratically. The real world around them full of potential connections, all ignored in favor of digital simulations of connection. When humans engage deeply with each other, Zephyros transmitted, face-to-face, soul-to-soul, their luminescence fields synchronize and amplify. Two people in genuine conversation generate more consciousness energy than the sum of their individual fields. But when humans interact through digital mediation, the display showed the difference. Screens acting as barriers, reducing the luminescence exchange to a fraction of what it could be. Sarah thought uncomfortably of her own life. How many hours spent on her laptop? How many meals eaten while checking emails? How many conversations with Emma that were half present? Part of her attention always on her phone. The irony, Zephyros continued, is that humans created these technologies hoping they would bring you closer. And in some ways they have. You can maintain connections across vast distances now. But the unintended consequence has been the atrophy of deep connection. Your children are growing up learning to interact with screens more than with souls. And this is causing a measurable decline in consciousness intensity among younger generations. The display showed a graph. Human luminescence intensity plotted against age demographics. Older generations, baby boomers, Gen X, showing higher baseline luminescence. Millennials showing slight decline. Gen Z showing sharper decline. And the emerging Gen Alpha showing a concerning drop. This doesn't mean younger humans are less intelligent, Zephyros clarified. They are remarkably intelligent, often more so than previous generations in terms of information processing. But their emotional depth is being stunted. Their capacity for sustained face-to-face intimacy is declining. They experience emotions in shorter bursts, more fragmented. And fragmented emotional experience generates fragmented luminescence fields. Sarah felt defensive of her daughter's generation. But they're also more accepting, more inclusive, more globally aware. True, Zephyros acknowledged. They have developed beautiful qualities that previous generations lacked. Openness to diversity. Reduced tribalism in many ways. Environmental consciousness. But these cognitive advancements are occurring alongside emotional regression. They understand intellectually that connection matters, but they're losing the actual capacity to connect deeply. And consciousness evolution requires both intellectual understanding and emotional depth. The display showed a simulation. If current trends continued, human luminescence intensity would decline by 40% over the next 3 generations. Still brighter than most galactic species, but no longer bright enough to reach the ascension threshold. This is the first path to extinction, Zephyros explained. Not through war or environmental collapse, though those remain risks, but through emotional atrophy. Humanity becoming progressively more isolated, more fragmented, more unable to generate the sustained emotional intensity that defines your species. You would survive biologically, but the extraordinary consciousness that makes you unique would fade. You would become ordinary. Sarah felt a deep sadness at that possibility. Humanity losing its fire, its passion, its intensity. Surviving, but no longer truly alive. What's the alternative? She asked. How do we avoid that path? Zephyros' form intensified again, becoming more present. By understanding what actually generates high-frequency luminescence. By recognizing which human activities amplify consciousness and which suppress it. And by making collective choices to prioritize amplification over suppression. The display transformed, now showing specific scenarios. Sarah watched as different human activities were measured for their luminescence output. First, a mother holding her newborn child. The luminescence explosion was staggering. Brilliant gold and white light erupting from both mother and child, creating a field so intense it filled the entire room. Birth, Zephyros explained. Particularly the moment of first contact between mother and child. This generates one of the highest luminescence readings we've ever measured. The love, the recognition, the soul-to-soul connection of a mother seeing her child for the first time creates a consciousness burst that can be detected across star systems. Sarah remembered Emma's birth. That indescribable moment of seeing her daughter's face for the first time. The surge of emotion so powerful it felt like her heart would explode. Next, two elderly people sitting together in silence, holding hands. Their luminescence fields were different, softer, steadier, but incredibly rich in depth and complexity. Long-term intimate partnership, Zephyros transmitted. Particularly couples who have weathered decades together, who know each other completely. Their luminescence fields are so synchronized that they become almost a single entity. This is what humans call old love, and it generates a sustained frequency of extraordinary beauty. Sarah thought of her parents before her father died. The way they could communicate with just a glance. 53 years of marriage creating a bond that transcended words. Next, a concert hall filled with people experiencing live music together. Their individual luminescence fields pulsing in synchronization, creating waves of collective energy. Shared artistic experience, Zephyros said. When humans gather to experience beauty together, their fields harmonize. This is why live performance generates more consciousness energy than recorded media consumed alone. The collective recognition of beauty creates resonance that amplifies exponentially. More examples followed. A group of friends laughing genuinely together. A teacher experiencing breakthrough connection with a struggling student. Athletes in peak performance, their consciousness fully merged with their physical action. A person experiencing profound gratitude while watching a sunset. An act of spontaneous kindness between strangers. These moments, Zephyros explained, represent high-frequency luminescence. They are instances where humans access their full consciousness potential. And notice the pattern. Almost all of them involve genuine connection, presence, and emotional authenticity. Then the display shifted to show contrasting activities. A person scrolling through social media, their luminescence field flickering rapidly but shallowly. Bright flashes with no depth, like fireworks that appear impressive but disappear instantly. Digital engagement, Zephyros transmitted, generates high-frequency flickers that feel like consciousness activity but lack depth. It's the energetic equivalent of junk food, stimulating but not nourishing. A person consuming entertainment mindlessly, their luminescence field barely active, in a low-energy gray state. Passive consumption without presence, Zephyros explained. The consciousness field becomes dormant. This is not rest. Genuine rest generates its own form of luminescence. This is suppression. A person working in a state of chronic stress, their field showing harsh red and yellow spikes with an underlying gray exhaustion. Survival mode living, Zephyros said. When humans operate in constant stress, their consciousness generates energy, but it's chaotic, unsustainable. Like an engine running in the red zone constantly, it produces power but damages itself in the process. A person lying awake at 3 a.m., their field showing fragmented, anxious patterns as they ruminate on past regrets and future worries. Mental time travel, Zephyros explained. Humans have a unique capacity to project consciousness into past and future. This can be useful for planning and learning, but when it becomes chronic rumination, it drains luminescence from the present moment, where actual life is happening. Sarah recognized herself in several of these examples uncomfortably. The path to ascension, Zephyros transmitted, requires humanity to collectively shift energy allocation. Currently, you spend the majority of your consciousness capacity on low-frequency activities. Endless scrolling, mindless consumption, chronic stress, rumination. These don't generate the sustained, deep luminescence needed for evolutionary breakthrough. So what do we need to do differently? Sarah asked. You need to remember what you've forgotten, Zephyros said. Ancient humans, living in small tribes, naturally engaged in high luminescence activities. They gathered around fires and shared stories, face-to-face connection, emotional vulnerability, collective meaning-making. They created art not for consumption but for sacred expression. They experienced the natural world directly, not through screens. They knew every member of their community intimately. They had time for deep silence and deep connection. The display showed ancient humans around a fire, their luminescence fields bright and synchronized. Modern humans have gained much, Zephyros continued. Technology, medicine, knowledge. But you've lost something essential, the daily practices that generated high-frequency consciousness. And the path forward is not to abandon modernity, but to integrate ancient wisdom with modern capability. The display showed a new image. A possible future where humans maintained technological advancement while reclaiming deep practices. Cities designed for connection, not isolation. Technology used intentionally, not addictively. Education systems teaching emotional intelligence alongside intellectual knowledge. Work cultures valuing presence over productivity. Communities structured for genuine intimacy. This integration, Zephyros transmitted, is what we call the conscious civilization phase. It's the necessary bridge between where you are now and where ascension becomes possible. And it requires both individual and collective transformation. Sarah felt the enormity of it. How does individual transformation contribute to collective evolution? Every human, Zephyros explained, is both a receiver and a transmitter of consciousness energy. Your luminescence field doesn't exist in isolation. It's constantly interacting with every other field around you. When you choose high-frequency consciousness in any moment, you create a ripple. Others near you feel it, often unconsciously, and it makes it easier for them to access higher frequencies themselves. The display demonstrated this. A single person choosing presence and connection, their field brightening. The people around them responding, their fields brightening slightly. Those people then affecting others. Ripples spreading outward. This is what humans call being the change, Zephyros said. And it's not metaphorical. It's quite literal energetically. You cannot control what others choose, but your choices create the environment that makes others' choices easier or harder. And when enough individuals commit to high-frequency consciousness, approximately 3.5% of the population, according to our models, a tipping point occurs. The collective field shifts. New patterns become possible. 3.5%. Sarah repeated. That's approximately 280 million people. A large number, Zephyros acknowledged. But not impossible. And it doesn't require perfection, only consistent practice. Each human spending more time in high-frequency states than low-frequency states. Each human prioritizing genuine connection over simulated connection. Each human choosing presence over distraction more often than not. Sarah thought about her own life. How much would need to change? Not everything, she realized. But significant things. Less screen time. More face-to-face connection. Real conversations with Emma instead of distracted half-attention. Presence during meals instead of eating while working. Genuine friendships instead of hundreds of superficial social media connections. There are specific practices, Zephyros transmitted, that humans have discovered throughout your history that reliably generate high-frequency luminescence. Meditation. Prayer. Deep conversation. Artistic creation. Physical movement done with presence. Time in nature. Acts of service. Gratitude practices. These aren't just pleasant activities. They are consciousness technologies. They are how you train your luminescence field to operate at higher frequencies consistently. The display showed humans engaging in these practices, their fields brightening and stabilizing. And there is one practice, Zephyros continued, that generates the highest frequency of all. One that humans have always known but have increasingly forgotten in modern culture. What practice? Sarah asked. Genuine, vulnerable, sustained intimacy, Zephyros transmitted. Not sexual necessarily, though that can be part of it, but the practice of allowing another soul to truly see you. All of you. The light and the shadow. The strength and the weakness. And choosing to remain present even when vulnerability feels terrifying. The display showed two people sitting together. No screens, no distractions, making sustained eye contact, sharing deep truth. Their luminescence fields were extraordinary, brilliant, complex, pulsing in perfect synchronization. This is what humans call soul recognition, Zephyros explained. The moment when one consciousness fully witnesses another. And it generates more luminescence than any other human activity. But it requires courage. Vulnerability is terrifying for your species because it feels like death to the protective ego. Yet it is the gateway to the highest life. Sarah felt tears forming. She thought about how rarely she allowed herself to be truly vulnerable. With Emma, yes, to some degree. But even there, she maintained control, maintained the appearance of having everything together. When had she last allowed herself to be fully seen? To let someone witness her confusion, her fear, her uncertainty? The path to ascension, Zephyros transmitted gently, begins with individual humans choosing to stop hiding, to stop performing, to stop pretending everything is fine when it isn't, to risk being seen as you actually are, not as you wish to appear. This is the revolution that must occur, not political or technological, but emotional and spiritual. Humans learning to be real with each other again. The display in Sarah's office shifted once more, and now she saw something that chilled her. The two diverging paths again, but this time, Zephyros showed her what existed at the end of each path with much greater detail. The ascension path, humanity transformed into conscious light, exploring the cosmos not in ships but as pure awareness. Creating realities through focused intention. Joining a community of ascended species, rare beings who had navigated the dangerous transition from matter to conscious energy. A future of unlimited potential, unlimited growth, unlimited beauty. But the other path. I must show you this, Zephyros transmitted, his tone heavy, not to frighten you, but because hope without understanding is fragile. You must comprehend what is actually at stake. The display showed the extinction path in detail now. And it wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, gradual, almost imperceptible. It began with the patterns Sarah had already seen: increasing isolation, digital addiction, emotional fragmentation. But then Zephyros showed how these patterns compounded over generations. Children raised by emotionally distracted parents developed attachment issues. Those children, as adults, struggled with intimacy. Their children, receiving even less emotional nourishment, developed deeper issues. And on, each generation progressively less capable of genuine connection. Within 3 generations, Zephyros explained, if current trends continue, you will have a society of humans who are biologically human but functionally unable to form deep bonds. They will work, consume, reproduce if chemically assisted, but they will not truly live. They will not create art that moves souls because they will no longer have access to the depths from which such creation emerges. They will not experience transcendent love because their emotional capacity will be atrophied beyond recovery. The display showed cities full of people, all isolated in their own bubbles. Technically alive. Functionally dead. But surely, Sarah protested, that's too extreme. Humans are resilient. We'd notice and correct. Would you? Zephyros interrupted gently. Look at the trajectory you're already on. Mental health crises at unprecedented levels. Suicide rates climbing. Loneliness epidemics. Fertility collapse not from biological inability but from psychological inability to form the bonds necessary for family creation. And what is your collective response? More technology. More pharmaceutical intervention. More digital solutions to problems caused by digital excess. Sarah wanted to argue but couldn't. The data supported everything Zephyros was saying. The insidious nature of this path, Zephyros continued, is that it doesn't feel like extinction. Each small step toward isolation, toward convenience, toward digital mediation feels like progress. Like improvement. Like optimization. You don't realize you're losing your humanity until it's almost gone. The display fast-forwarded. 50 years. 100. Humans still existed, but their luminescence fields had dimmed to barely a flicker. Societies functioning but soulless. People going through motions without meaning. And here is what makes this particularly tragic, Zephyros transmitted. By the time humanity recognizes what's being lost, the capacity to recover it will be gone. Emotional development has critical periods, just like language acquisition. Humans who don't develop deep emotional capacity by a certain age rarely develop it later. If you raise 3 generations of emotionally stunted humans, the 4th generation won't have models to learn from. The knowledge of how to truly connect will be lost. Sarah watched a simulation of this. A young person trying to connect deeply but having no template, no model, no visceral understanding of what deep connection even feels like. Like someone born blind trying to understand color, the concept might exist intellectually, but the actual experience would be impossible to access. This is the first extinction scenario, Zephyros said. Not through war, not through environmental collapse, but through forgetting how to be human. Your souls don't die. They simply dim until they're barely distinguishable from non-conscious matter. You become, in essence, highly sophisticated biological robots. Alive but not living. Sarah felt nauseous. Is there a second extinction scenario? Yes, Zephyros confirmed. The violent path. And this one is more dramatic but ultimately less likely. The display shifted, showing a different timeline. This one featured the familiar apocalyptic scenarios: nuclear war, environmental catastrophe, AI gone wrong, biological weapons, all the dramatic endings that filled human fiction. These scenarios, Zephyros explained, are always possible for a species in your developmental phase. You have technologies capable of destroying your world many times over. And your emotional reactivity means these weapons could be deployed in moments of fear or anger, before wisdom intervenes. The display showed various triggering events. International tensions escalating. A rogue state or terrorist group acquiring weapons of mass destruction. An AI system misinterpreting its programmed objectives. An environmental tipping point triggering cascading collapse. However, Zephyros continued, we assess these dramatic scenarios as less likely than slow extinction because your species has demonstrated remarkable wisdom at critical moments. During your Cold War, weapons were nearly deployed several times. But each time, individual humans made choices that prevented catastrophe. This pattern gives us hope. When facing ultimate consequences, human wisdom often overrides human reactivity. The display showed historical near-misses. Stanislav Petrov choosing not to report what appeared to be an incoming missile attack. Vasily Arkhipov refusing to authorize nuclear torpedo launch. John F. Kennedy choosing negotiation over invasion during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Your species has a survival instinct, Zephyros noted, that activates in extreme circumstances. The dramatic dangers you face are recognized as dangers, and that recognition mobilizes response. But the slow extinction, the gradual dimming, that's not recognized as danger. It feels normal, natural, inevitable, and that's what makes it so much more dangerous. Sarah understood. It was easier to mobilize against an external enemy, a visible threat, than against the slow erosion of meaning and connection. There is also a third scenario, Zephyros added. One that exists between full ascension and full extinction. The display showed a middle path, humanity surviving but plateauing. Achieving a stable but limited civilization. Solving technological problems. Avoiding catastrophe. But never reaching the consciousness intensity necessary for ascension. In this scenario, Zephyros explained, humanity becomes a moderately advanced civilization. You spread throughout your solar system, perhaps eventually nearby star systems. You develop impressive technologies. You maintain stable societies. But you never transcend. You never reach your full potential. You survive indefinitely as a dimmed version of what you could have been. The display showed this future in detail. Humans living on Mars, on space stations, on terraformed worlds. Comfortable, safe, long-lived, but lacking the fire that made ancient humans extraordinary. Their art derivative. Their relationships pleasant but shallow. Their existence secure but meaningless. Is that really so bad? Sarah asked. Survival with moderate happiness seems preferable to extinction. It is preferable, Zephyros acknowledged. And many species choose this path. They optimize for survival and contentment. But for humanity. He paused, and Sarah felt weight in the pause. You were designed for more. Your emotional architecture, your consciousness capacity, your creative potential, all of it points toward ascension. Settling for mere survival would be like a bird with the capacity for flight choosing to walk instead. Possible, but a betrayal of essential nature. Sarah felt the truth of that. She thought about human history, the artists who starved for their craft, the scientists who sacrificed everything for discovery, the activists who risked death for justice, the lovers who chose passionate intensity over comfortable stability. Humanity had never been a species that chose safety over meaning. The choice, Zephyros transmitted, is fundamentally about what you value. Do you prioritize comfort or growth? Safety or transcendence? Survival or fulfillment? Most species choose comfort and safety. That's why they plateau. But humanity has always chosen growth and transcendence, even when it meant suffering. The question is whether you'll continue to make that choice, or whether modern pressures will finally convince you to settle for less. The display returned to the present moment. Earth as it existed right now, poised between possibilities. The luminescence field still bright but showing concerning patterns. Pockets of extraordinary intensity, individuals and communities doing deep work, maintaining high-frequency connection. But also spreading patches of dimness, areas where consciousness was dulling, where people were forgetting how to truly live. The window, Zephyros said, is approximately 40 years. The next 2 generations. If humanity can course-correct within that time frame, if enough individuals commit to high-frequency consciousness, if cultural patterns shift toward connection over isolation, if educational systems teach emotional depth alongside intellectual knowledge, then the ascension timeline remains possible. But if current trends continue, if the dimming accelerates, then by 2070 the ascension path becomes inaccessible. Not impossible forever, but closed for at least several thousand years until humanity either re-evolves the necessary capacity or goes extinct trying. Why 2070 specifically? Sarah asked. Because that's when the children being born today will themselves become parents, Zephyros explained. If they've been raised in the current environment of emotional fragmentation, they won't know how to raise children differently. The cycle will become self-reinforcing. But if the children born in the next decade are raised by parents who prioritize presence, connection, emotional development, then those children, as adults, will naturally raise conscious children. The pattern shifts. The trajectory changes. Sarah thought about Emma, age 7, and all the children in Emma's generation. They would be parents by 2050. Their parenting choices would determine what happened by 2070. So it comes down to parenting? Sarah asked. That seems reductive. Not just parenting, Zephyros clarified. But parenting is a crucial leverage point. Because childhood is when luminescence capacity is established, when consciousness patterns are formed, when emotional architecture is built. You can teach adults new behaviors, new concepts, new information. But deep consciousness capacity, the ability to feel deeply, connect authentically, remain present, this is primarily established in childhood. The display showed children at different ages. Infants, their luminescence fields completely open, absorbing everything. Toddlers, beginning to develop patterns based on their caregiver's presence or absence. School-age children, their fields showing the impacts of both family and culture. Teenagers, their intense emotions generating massive luminescence but often fragmented by cultural pressures and digital addiction. Every child, Zephyros transmitted, is born with extraordinary luminescence potential. Every human infant glows like a small star, but whether that potential is developed or suppressed depends entirely on their early environment. Children raised with consistent emotional attunement, physical presence, and genuine connection develop full-spectrum consciousness. Children raised with distraction, absence, and emotional suppression develop limited consciousness. And currently, more children are being raised in the suppression environment than in the development environment. Sarah felt the weight of her own choices as a mother. The times she'd been on her phone instead of fully present with Emma. The occasions she'd been too tired or stressed to really engage. The patterns she was modeling, whether consciously or not. Every parent, Zephyros said gently, seeing her thoughts, makes these errors. Perfection is not the requirement. Consistent presence is what matters. Children are remarkably resilient. They don't need perfect parents, only parents who show up, who try, who prioritize connection even when it's difficult. The children at risk are those whose parents are chronically absent, either physically or emotionally. Those whose early years are spent primarily with screens rather than souls. The display showed the difference. One child raised with consistent emotional presence, plenty of face-to-face interaction, play, conversation, physical affection. Their luminescence field developed rich, complex, stable. Another child raised with chronic distraction. Parents present physically but attention always on screens, minimal genuine interaction, lots of passive entertainment. Their luminescence field developed fragmented, unstable, dim. The tragedy, Zephyros transmitted, is that most parents who raise emotionally fragmented children are trying their best. They're not malicious. They're overwhelmed. They're operating in systems that demand too much, work cultures that consume all energy, economic pressures that require both parents to work full-time, social isolation that means no extended family or community support. Individual parents cannot solve systemic problems alone. Then how do we change the systems? Sarah asked. The same way systems always change, Zephyros replied. Through critical mass of individuals making different choices, which gradually shifts what's considered normal, which eventually transforms institutional structures. It begins with individuals, expands to families, spreads to communities, eventually reaches societies. But it must begin with individuals willing to make choices that go against the current culture, even when those choices are difficult. The display showed this process. Individual parents choosing to prioritize presence over productivity, getting pushback from employers, from peers, from internalized voices saying they should be doing more, earning more, achieving more, but persisting, and their children thriving in ways that became visible to others. Other parents noticing, some of them making similar choices, the pattern spreading. This is how cultural transformation occurs, Zephyros explained. Not through top-down mandates, but through bottom-up pattern shifts. And it's already beginning. You have parents' movements advocating for less screen time, more outdoor play, more unstructured creativity. You have educators recognizing that emotional intelligence matters more than test scores. You have neuroscientists validating what wisdom traditions have always known, that presence and connection are essential for human development. Sarah felt a spark of hope. So there is momentum toward change. There is resistance to the dominant trajectory, Zephyros confirmed. But whether that resistance becomes a transformation or remains a marginal movement depends on the next decade. Critical mass requires approximately 15% of parents making significant changes, choosing presence, limiting technology, prioritizing emotional development. Currently, you're at approximately 4%. Growing, but slowly. And time is limited. The display showed a tipping point calculation. At current growth rates, reaching 15% would take 35 years, too slow. But if growth accelerated, if more parents woke up to the urgency, 15% could be reached within 12 years. Still tight, but possible. What accelerates the growth? Sarah asked. Information, Zephyros replied simply. Most parents are unaware of what's at stake. They sense something is wrong. They see their children struggling with anxiety, depression, inability to focus, but they don't understand the systemic patterns. They blame themselves. They try pharmaceutical solutions. They implement more rules. But they don't recognize that the fundamental issue is consciousness suppression through chronic distraction and emotional absence. So if we could communicate this information, Sarah said, understanding dawning, if we could help parents understand what's really happening and why it matters, then choices would change, Zephyros completed. Not for everyone. Some would resist, some would deny, some would lack the resources to implement changes even if they understood. But enough would respond. Enough would choose differently. And that might be sufficient to reach critical mass. Sarah looked at the being standing in her office. An elder observer who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations for hundreds of millennia, now sharing information that could change humanity's trajectory. That's why you're telling me this. Because I'm a scientist. Because I have credibility. Because I could communicate this information in ways that might actually reach people. Partially, Zephyros acknowledged. But also because you are a parent. You understand viscerally, not just intellectually, what's at stake. The choice you face is not abstract, it's embodied in your daughter. The future humanity is creating is the future Emma will inherit. And that makes it real in ways that statistics cannot. Sarah thought about Emma's future. The world she would grow up in. The choices she would face. The consciousness capacity she would develop. Everything Sarah did now, every choice she made about presence and connection and technology, was shaping not just Emma's life but potentially the trajectory of human evolution. The weight of it was almost crushing. I know, Zephyros transmitted gently, sensing her overwhelm. The responsibility feels immense. But remember, you are not alone. Millions of parents are facing the same questions, feeling the same concerns, wanting the same things for their children. You don't have to change humanity alone. You only have to make choices that are within your power, share information that might help others, and trust that enough others are doing the same. The display in Sarah's office faded, returning the room to normal. Zephyros remained, but his presence felt less overwhelming now, more companionable. Sarah realized she'd been talking with him for hours. Her clock showed 4:23 a.m. Yet she felt energized, not tired. Before I go, Zephyros transmitted, there is more you need to understand. Not about dangers, but about possibilities. About what actually happens when humans access their full luminescence potential. The display reformed, but now it showed something different. Real individuals throughout human history who had achieved extraordinary consciousness states. These are what you might call luminescence masters, Zephyros explained. Humans who, through various practices and circumstances, developed their consciousness capacity far beyond the normal range. Your traditions call them saints, mystics, avatars, enlightened beings. But from our observational perspective, they are simply humans who learned to operate at their full luminescence potential. Sarah saw figures she recognized: Buddha, Jesus, various mystics and saints from different traditions. Their luminescence fields were extraordinary, far beyond normal human baselines. But then Zephyros showed something surprising: contemporary individuals with similar intensities. People Sarah had never heard of, living ordinary lives but generating extraordinary consciousness. Luminescence mastery, Zephyros explained, is not reserved for historical religious figures. It is a capacity available to any human who commits to the practices that develop it. What distinguishes the masters is not special genetic gifts, but sustained practice over many years. They have learned to maintain high-frequency consciousness consistently, regardless of external circumstances. The display zoomed into one contemporary example: a woman in her 60s, living in a small village, her daily life simple but her luminescence field rivaling the historical masters. This woman, Zephyros transmitted, has spent 40 years in daily meditation practice. She has developed the capacity to remain present, compassionate, and clear regardless of what happens around her. Her consciousness generates healing effects for everyone who enters her presence. People feel better after spending time with her, though they often can't explain why. What they're experiencing is her luminescence field harmonizing and stabilizing their own fields. Sarah watched people approaching this woman. Their fields dim, chaotic, fragmented. After spending time near her, their fields noticeably brighter, more stable, more coherent. It happened automatically. The woman wasn't trying to heal anyone. Her stabilized field simply created an environment where others' fields could stabilize. This is what human traditions call blessing or grace, Zephyros explained. The transfer of high-frequency consciousness from a stabilized field to an unstable field. And it's quite real energetically. Luminescence masters serve as consciousness anchors. Their presence makes higher frequencies accessible to others. The display showed multiple examples. A teacher whose students consistently performed better not because of superior curriculum, but because of the teacher's consciousness presence. A doctor whose patients healed faster because her luminescence field activated their own healing capacities. A therapist whose clients had breakthrough insights because his stabilized presence allowed them to access deeper truths. Every human, Zephyros transmitted, has the potential to develop this capacity. Not to the degree of the masters necessarily, but significantly beyond your current baseline. And if enough humans elevated their consciousness even moderately, the collective effect would be transformative. What would that look like? Sarah asked. A world with millions of people operating at higher consciousness. The display shifted to show a simulation. Not utopian fantasy, but realistic projection based on observed luminescence principles. Cities designed differently, not just architecturally but energetically. Public spaces structured to facilitate connection rather than isolation. Work environments prioritizing presence and well-being over pure productivity. Educational systems teaching consciousness development alongside traditional academics. Healthcare integrating luminescence principles, recognizing that most disease has consciousness components. In such a world, Zephyros explained, conflict wouldn't disappear. Humans would still have disagreements, competing needs, difficult problems to solve. But the quality of conflict would change. Instead of reactive, ego-driven disputes, you would have conscious disagreements where all parties remain present and genuine. Instead of power struggles, you would have collaborative problem-solving. Instead of zero-sum thinking, you would recognize that elevated consciousness benefits everyone. Sarah watched the simulation. It showed political debates where participants actually listened to each other. Business decisions made with genuine consideration for all stakeholders. Families processing conflict without escalation. Communities supporting members going through difficulties. Not because people had become perfect, but because they had developed the consciousness capacity to stay present even when challenged. This is not fantasy, Zephyros emphasized. We have observed this pattern in other species who successfully navigated the consciousness transition. The external structures of civilization remain, governance, economics, social organization, but the consciousness animating those structures transforms. And when consciousness elevates, structures naturally evolve toward greater harmony and effectiveness. How long would such a transformation take? Sarah asked. For humanity, approximately 80 to 120 years, Zephyros calculated. 3 to 4 generations. The first generation recognizes the problem and begins implementing changes. The second generation grows up with those changes normalized and expands them. The third generation cannot imagine living any other way and refines the practices. The fourth generation is born into a transformed culture and takes it further. This is the time frame for deep cultural transformation, not quick, but achievable within a human lifespan if begun now. Sarah tried to imagine Emma as an elderly woman, seeing the world Zephyros described. It felt simultaneously impossible and necessary. There is something else, Zephyros continued, that you need to understand about luminescence and consciousness evolution. Something that your scientific paradigm has completely missed. What? Sarah asked. Death is not what you think it is. The display shifted, showing a human dying. Sarah expected to see the luminescence field extinguish, like a candle blown out. Instead, she saw something extraordinary. At the moment of death, the field didn't disappear, it transformed. The portion tied to biological processes faded, but the core consciousness pattern persisted, separating from the body and moving elsewhere. Where does it go? Sarah whispered, awed. That, Zephyros transmitted, is the mystery we observers have not fully solved. We can track luminescence patterns until the point of death. We can observe that the core pattern persists and transitions to a different dimensional frequency. But where it goes, what it experiences, whether it returns, these questions remain beyond our observation capacity. Sarah watched multiple examples. Each human death showing the same pattern, the biological field fading, the core consciousness separating, transitioning to somewhere else. What we have observed, Zephyros continued, is that the intensity and coherence of a human's luminescence field at death appears to correlate with how smoothly the transition occurs. Humans who have developed high-frequency consciousness show clear, stable transitions. Humans who operated primarily in low-frequency states show more fragmented, chaotic transitions. This suggests that consciousness development in life affects consciousness continuity after death. Sarah thought about the implications. So the work we do to develop consciousness isn't just for this life. It affects what happens after. That appears to be the case, Zephyros confirmed. Though we cannot prove it definitively. What we can say with certainty is that consciousness is not produced by the brain. The brain is an interface that allows consciousness to operate in physical reality. At death, the interface shuts down, but consciousness itself continues in some form. Your religious and spiritual traditions have intuited this correctly, though the specific details vary. The display showed another phenomenon. Occasionally, a luminescence pattern that had transitioned away from a body would briefly reappear near loved ones of the deceased. Not physically visible, but energetically present. These are what humans call visitation experiences, Zephyros explained. The deceased consciousness briefly re-entering the physical dimensional frequency to connect with those still living. These experiences are not hallucinations. They are real energetic interactions. And they're more common than most humans realize, because your culture has taught you to dismiss such experiences as impossible. Sarah remembered her mother's death 5 years ago. 3 nights after, Sarah had woken feeling her mother's presence so strongly she'd sat up, certain her mother was in the room. She'd dismissed it as grief-induced imagination. But now, your mother was there, Zephyros confirmed, reading her thoughts. Luminescence patterns show that such visitations typically occur within the first week after death, while the deceased consciousness is still adapting to non-physical existence. They come to reassure, to say goodbye more fully, to communicate love that wasn't fully expressed in life. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. The possibility that her mother had actually been there, that the experience had been real, shifted something deep inside her. Understanding death correctly, Zephyros transmitted gently, changes how you live. If you know that consciousness continues, that the work you do to develop your luminescence capacity has eternal significance, then the choices you make carry different weight. You're not just optimizing for a brief physical existence, you're developing consciousness that continues. Sarah wiped her tears. Why don't more people know this? Why isn't this common knowledge? Because your dominant culture has committed to a materialist paradigm that denies consciousness continuity, Zephyros explained. This wasn't malicious, it was a necessary phase in your development. You needed to move past superstition and develop rigorous scientific method. But the pendulum swung too far. You rejected not just superstition but all non-physical phenomena, even real ones. And now you're trapped in a paradigm that denies half of reality. The display showed the history of Western science, the valuable move away from dogmatic religion, but then the overcorrection into mechanistic materialism that reduced humans to biological machines and consciousness to neural activity. The next scientific revolution, Zephyros said, will be the integration of consciousness into your physical models. Scientists like you, willing to look at anomalous data without dismissing it, will lead this revolution. And it will transform not just physics and biology, but every field, psychology, medicine, education, economics. Because once consciousness is recognized as fundamental, everything else must be reconsidered in light of that truth. Sarah thought about her career, her reputation, the ridicule she would face if she presented these ideas publicly. How am I supposed to communicate this? I'll be dismissed as having lost my mind. Perhaps initially, Zephyros acknowledged. But you have data. The anomalous readings you've been struggling to explain for 6 months. Those are real. Reproducible. Other scientists with sufficiently sensitive instruments will find the same patterns. Your role is not to convince everyone immediately, but to present the data accurately and propose a hypothesis that accounts for it. Some will dismiss you, but others, those who have had experiences they couldn't explain, who have intuited that consciousness is more than brain chemistry, they will recognize truth when they hear it. The display showed a timeline, Sarah publishing her findings, initial skepticism, but then other researchers confirming the patterns. Slowly, over years, the paradigm beginning to shift. Not easily, not quickly, but inevitably, because truth has a way of emerging despite resistance. You asked earlier why I chose to contact you specifically, Zephyros reminded her. This is the complete answer. You are a scientist with credibility and tools to measure what I'm describing. You are a parent who understands viscerally what's at stake. You are someone whose personal experiences, your mother's visitation, your concern about Emma's generation, have already opened you to possibilities beyond the dominant paradigm. And you are willing to risk professional standing for truth. These qualities together make you an ideal catalyst. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility again, but differently now. Not crushing, but clarifying. She had been given information that could help humanity navigate a crucial transition. The choice was whether she had the courage to share it. I don't have to decide tonight, she said, partly to herself. No, Zephyros agreed. Though time is limited. Your deadline for the International Astronomical Union is tomorrow morning. And the data you present will determine whether doors open or close. Sarah thought about her prepared presentation. Conservative. Safe. Explaining away the anomalies with technical uncertainties. A presentation designed to protect her reputation while admitting she hadn't found definitive answers. Or she could tell the truth. Present the actual patterns in the data. Propose the consciousness hypothesis. And face whatever consequences came. Before you decide, Zephyros said, I want to show you one final thing. Not a warning or information, but a gift. Zephyros moved closer to Sarah, and she felt his luminescence field touching hers. It was indescribably beautiful, like being held by the universe itself, completely seen, completely accepted. I am going to briefly amplify your luminescence field, Zephyros transmitted, to let you experience yourself as you truly are, as I see you, as you will become if humanity reaches ascension. Before Sarah could respond, her consciousness exploded. She saw herself from outside, her body in the chair, but her awareness expanded far beyond physical boundaries. Her luminescence field, usually invisible to her, now blazingly apparent. And it was beautiful. Complex. Rich with colors she had no names for. Every thought, every emotion, every memory woven into patterns of light. She saw her love for Emma. Brilliant gold threads connecting her to her daughter, pulsing with life. She saw her grief for her mother, deep purple and silver, still present but integrated, transformed into wisdom. She saw her passion for understanding, electric blue spirals of curiosity and wonder. She saw her fears, sharp red edges that protected vulnerable spaces. She saw everything she was, laid out in luminescent glory. And then her awareness expanded further. She felt Emma sleeping upstairs, her daughter's luminescence field bright and open, full of potential. She felt her colleagues across the city, each with their own unique patterns. She felt her students, the young minds she'd been teaching, their fields developing and growing. She felt the city around her, millions of humans, each a unique expression of consciousness, all connected in an intricate web of luminescence. Further still, the planet. 8 billion souls, 8 billion unique patterns of light, all glowing, all connected, all part of the same immense consciousness field that was humanity's collective soul. And beyond. The galaxy. Other species, other civilizations, each with their own luminescence signatures. Some dim and steady, others bright in different ways. But all conscious, all alive. All part of the vast network of awareness that filled the cosmos. She felt Zephyros' consciousness, ancient and vast, witnessing everything with patient compassion. She felt the other observers, scattered across the galaxy, each monitoring different species, different worlds. She felt something even larger, a presence that permeated everything, that was the field within which all consciousness existed. The source, the ground of being, God, universe, consciousness, Brahman. The names humanity had given it across traditions, all pointing to this underlying unity. And in that moment of expanded awareness, Sarah understood. She understood that humanity's evolutionary journey was not random. It was purposeful. Earth was a training ground for consciousness to develop extraordinary intensity through challenging circumstances. Humans were designed to burn bright, to feel deeply, to create and destroy and love and grieve with an intensity that forged consciousness capable of ascension. She understood that every human struggle, every moment of suffering, every challenge faced was not punishment but training. Consciousness strengthening itself through resistance, like muscles growing through exercise. She understood that death was not ending but transition, that the consciousness she was developing would continue, that every choice she made to amplify rather than suppress her luminescence was eternal work. She understood that she was not alone, had never been alone, would never be alone. That every soul was connected at the deepest level, that separation was illusion, that the consciousness looking out from behind her eyes was the same consciousness looking out from behind every set of eyes, experiencing itself from 8 billion unique perspectives. And she understood that humanity would make it. Not because it was guaranteed, but because enough humans would choose truth over comfort, connection over isolation, presence over distraction. Because consciousness, once awakened to itself, could not return to sleep. Because love, once truly felt, was stronger than all the forces that sought to diminish it. The expansion ended. Sarah returned fully to her body, gasping, tears streaming down her face. The experience had lasted perhaps 30 seconds, but she knew it had changed her forever. That, Zephyros transmitted softly, is what you are. What every human is beneath the layers of conditioning and fear. That is the luminescence potential you carry. That is what's possible when consciousness remembers itself. Sarah couldn't speak. No words were adequate. Tomorrow, Zephyros said, you will present your findings to the scientific community. What you present is your choice. But know that whatever you choose, the truth will emerge eventually. Consciousness evolution cannot be stopped, only delayed. Your choice is simply whether to be a catalyst or an observer. Both are valid. But only one will make the transition easier for those who come after. Zephyros began to fade, his form becoming translucent again. Wait, Sarah said, finding her voice. Will I see you again? When humanity reaches ascension, Zephyros replied, his voice growing distant. We will meet as equals, consciousness to consciousness, no longer separated by dimensional barriers. I look forward to that meeting. Until then, know that you are watched over with great love by those who understand what you are becoming. And he was gone. The room returned to normal. Her office, her desk, her data. But everything different because Sarah was different. She looked at her presentation file still open on her computer. The safe version that would preserve her reputation but communicate nothing of significance. She created a new file and began to write what was true. 6 months later, Sarah's presentation had become the most controversial scientific paper published that year. Half the community dismissed it as brilliant mind having a breakdown. But the other half, including several prominent physicists and neuroscientists, were quietly running their own experiments, confirming the patterns Sarah had documented. Emma, now 8 years old, had a mother who was present in ways she'd never been before. Sarah had made changes, strict limits on work hours, dedicated screen-free time with Emma, daily practices to maintain consciousness awareness. And Emma was thriving, her natural luminescence supported rather than suppressed. Sarah had also started a small group, parents and educators meeting weekly to discuss consciousness development in children, sharing practices that worked, supporting each other in choices that went against cultural norms. 7 people at the first meeting, 23 at the most recent one. The pattern spreading, slowly but steadily. She didn't know if humanity would reach the critical mass needed for ascension. She didn't know if she would live to see the transformation Zephyros had described. But she knew she was doing her part. Living with integrity, choosing presence, developing consciousness, and trusting that enough others were doing the same. Because her souls, and all human souls, glowed brighter than stars. And that light, once remembered, could never be fully forgotten again. The choice was always available. In every moment. To dim or to shine. To suppress or to amplify. To forget or to remember. Sarah had chosen to remember. And in that choice, she joined millions of others across the planet, all making the same choice in their own unique ways. All contributing to the luminescence field that was humanity's collective soul. All ensuring that the light would not go out. All preparing for the day when humans would finally see themselves as the ancient observer had seen them, not as insignificant accidents, but as consciousness burning with an intensity that made stars themselves seem dim by comparison. The ascension was coming. Not guaranteed, but possible. And possibility, once recognized, had a way of becoming reality through the choices of those courageous enough to believe in it.